So I came to a place where I was, at peace about where we were. And I would say, people would say, where are you in that story? And I'd say, I'm at peace about it. And they would look a little like, I'm not sure I believe you. And I would say, it's the kind of peace that comes after war. I think there's a certain kind of peace that you fight for. And that was peace I fought for year after year, me and Jesus, where I was able to come to a place of acceptance of where I was. And then I was ready for my daughter to come,
Mhm.
a different ending. It was like I had to release a story that I thought I was supposed to have in order to embrace the story that God had actually written for me, which was even better. And so I think that's one thing for people listening, going through a season of maybe an unmet desire or hope or dream, is to say it's okay to deeply grieve that your story doesn't look like you thought it would. But you can also live with the hope that God is writing what might be an even better story. And
Mhm.
so that was my journey. That I can say that very non-emotionally now, but it wasn't always that way. There was a lot of tears and frustration. I think one time I yelled out my window at pregnant cows in the spring.
How dare
So
they? How dare they?
I'm like, you have no idea how easy it is for you. So
Uh, Question for you. You said, how God delivered a child. Well, that sounds like a bit of a pun. That's not what I meant. But he delivered a better story for you once you had come to terms and really gone to that place of peace after the war. Um, has anyone, I mean, it sounds, and I know that's not what you're saying, but has anyone ever told you that you were holding back the blessing of God because you were in pain and grief? Because sometimes it's this idea that we hear from people who are trying to be helpful, but don't know that it is, that are saying, well, just get over it. And you're the one who is blocking the blessing of God because you're not over it yet. So hurry up to get to that place of peace, because only then will God bless you, which is not true. I mean, this is not absolutely not true. So in other words, is it our fault that we do not have the life we want because we're messed up?
yeah, I mean that's a great question. And I ask that question sometimes. I was like, is something wrong with me? Like, am I doing
Right.
something wrong
Exactly.
that this hasn't happened for me? And I think that the answer is no. We're just humans with a limited perspective, and we come up with stories of how our life's going to go. And then when that doesn't align with God's plan, we blame ourselves. And that's not it. It's just that we serve a God who doesn't think like we think, who doesn't write stories like we do, who doesn't have plans that look like ours. And so no, it's the opposite. Like in my story, he was inviting me to an even better story.
Mhm.
It wasn't that I was holding back, being held back by where I was in my grief. It was that he was holding me through my grief and saying, I have even more for you than you can imagine right now. And so I did have people say all kinds of crazy things to me, like from, I just know you're going to have a baby, to one person said, if you'll just quit your job and drop out of grad school, I'm sure that you'll get pregnant because stress keeps you from having a baby. And so I kind of learned to translate that into, they were trying to say, I love you and you're in pain, and I want to make that pain stop. And so I'm gonna say the only thing I can think of. And so what that helped, and then I think when people sometimes they wanna feel like this can't happen to me. And so when someone's saying, "Oh, you're blocking the blessing of God," that makes them feel safe, because then they think, "Well, as long as I don't do that, then I won't walk through what this person is walking through." And so I think that there's people who wanna make us feel better because they love us and they just choose the wrong words with good intentions. And then I think there's a sense of fear when we see someone going through something hard, and sometimes we spiritualize things so that we don't feel as much fear. Like, this person must be doing something wrong. Therefore, if I do everything right, this won't ever happen to me.
Mhm.
And so that's what it feels like if someone were to say, you're blocking God's best for your life because you don't have peace yet. That feels like someone who's scared of hard things happening, saying, as long as I do everything right, then things won't go wrong in my life. And she must not be doing something right, or this would not be happening to her.
Yeah.
And
It is.
so
Sorry,
go
go ahead.
ahead. That's it.
I was gonna say it actually is a false gospel. I mean,
Yeah.
because Jesus did everything right, and I mean, the cross.
Yeah. True.
So doing everything right is actually the opposite of a cure against suffering. It probably
Very
is
true.
going to lead to some form of suffering, because in Christ, that is, right? I mean, there's enough suffering in the world in general, but I mean, as Christians, to
Yes.
think that it's a form of, believing this prosperity gospel, that if you do everything right, then life is going to be good for you and God is going to bless you. Ultimately, yes. And Jesus is blessed beyond imagination, but it took the cross. And the cross
Yeah.
isn't just a blip in history, it is the crucial watershed moment of everything, which means, I mean, he tells us to pick up our own crosses. And so when you do everything right, that is when chances of suffering are actually going to
Mm.
not increase, but at least be very real. You are not removing the probability of suffering when you walk in fullness of faith. You are choosing a different kind of suffering, the suffering that isn't the consequence of sin or the consequence of foolishness, but you're choosing to side with the suffering of Christ. That's a daunting thought. And that's what you've experienced. I would, I would suspect that your faith and your trust in your Lord was shaped through that ordeal.
Yes, it was. It certainly taught me that I was not in control, you know?